All right, welcome back to Believe in Jets, a New York Jets podcast on the Believe Podcast Network. We are live reacting to what is now a few hours old, but it's news. We have news from the Jets in typical fashion because this is, I guess it's called Murphy's Law, although to think that I have this much influence on what happens in Jet world would be crazy. But I got on a flight, or I got on in the car on the way to a flight, and that was at about 1:40 p.m., which is the exact time that it was announced that Aaron Glenn is the next head coach of the New York Jets. Now, if you watched or listened to last episode, you know my feelings about this, but I'm not one of those people, and I know there are people who exist, which is crazy, but if you know this podcast and you know me and you've listened, I'm not one of those people who hopes that I'm right about things and hopes that things go wrong for the Jets organization. I'm one of the people who comes on here and I'm going to root like hell for Aaron Glenn. I'm one of the people who comes on here and hopes I'm wrong about Aaron Glenn. I hope he is the right coach for this job. I hope that he is a great coach and he is the next the coach of the Jets for the next 15, 20 years. He's a young guy. It's a first-time head coaching position. He's somebody who came up with the organization. That's what I hope. So we'll talk about that a little bit. My concerns are the same concerns I've had, and this is what I talked about on last episode. I didn't want to go down the same path. I didn't want to go down the path of a first-timer, a first-time head coach, a guy who's coming from within the organization. He was obviously drafted by the team. He went to Detroit, I understand, but he was a scout with the team. He has a relationship with Woody Johnson. I view all those things that people love. I view some of those things as negatives, honestly, because I don't want someone who's going to cater to everything that Woody Johnson wants. I don't want someone who's going to come in here and just be a yes man to Woody Johnson. We've done this time and time again with the first-time head coach who's specifically a defensive guy. My message to Aaron Glenn, what that would be is you have to be the same guy, because if he's the guy that he was in Detroit, if he's the guy that we saw in Hard Knocks a couple of years ago, that's a great coach. That's a great hire. That's a slam dunk choice by the New York Jets. But if he's not that guy, if he does what Robert Saleh did, which is all of a sudden just the bigness, the I guess how big everything is of it all got to him, and his personality shrunk, and all the responsibility and all the different things he had to do, he became so inauthentic. One of the things you love about watching Aaron Glenn is how authentic he is. He is such an authentic guy. You watch those clips, you watch the videos of him talking to his team. Again, there are so many great things that this guy can do when it comes to being a defensive guy, being a leader. And that's, again, you hear the same buzzwords, a leader of men, a disciplinarian, all these things. Again, I hope that continues. I fear that he's going to lose some of that just by getting caught up in the vortex that is the Jets. That's why I believe Aaron Glenn will be an extremely successful head coach in this league. I just hope he doesn't waste his one and only opportunity on coming to the Jets and he blows it. Now, for Robert Saleh's case, it looks like he's going to get another opportunity. As soon as this week, he could land as the new head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars, which is crazy. And I think if Saleh doesn't get fired in the middle of the season and Jeff Ulbrich doesn't totally tank the team into the tubes, which is what happened, I don't know if Saleh gets another opportunity. So Robert Saleh might have to send a thank you card to Jeff Ulbrich. Also, by the way, funny point about Saleh, if he does go to the Jaguars, another one of the teams that has a London game literally every year. It's like them and the Jets are the two London teams of the NFL. How perfect is that? Like, Saleh, you must really love the trip to London, although he was fired on the flight back from London. So I don't know. At the time, I thought it was a good decision, but so many things to discuss. Another one that's interesting to me, and we mentioned Saleh being fired back then. The Jets were the first team to fire their head coach in the NFL season. They fired him 5 weeks in. And they went through this whole process with the 33rd Street team, right? You're interviewing so many people, 100 different candidates they've interviewed, it felt like. Some of them didn't even make any sense. All that just to hire a guy who was in the organization, had relationships with Woody Johnson, had relationships with obviously a lot of the people. It felt like this was a hire that was going to happen. And I'm not quite sure why it took so long for the Jets to get to this point. Now, it's not like they lost out on any candidates. The only guy that they, quote, lost out on was Mike Vrabel, who was never going to come here in the first place. And when you stack the candidates up against each other, again, I don't think Aaron Glenn was a bad candidate. When you look at him, you look at his resume, a guy who's going to set the tone, a guy who's going to bring a culture, be a tough guy, Be a disciplinarian, which the Jets finally need. Be a guy who's tough on the defensive side, who has this tenacity that comes with him. There were a lot worse candidates than Aaron Glenn. It could have gone a lot worse than Aaron Glenn. Aaron Glenn, I think, is a really good hire for a lot of reasons. I just wish they interviewed Mike McCarthy. I just wish maybe we got another shot at Brian Flores, who's a guy who has coaching experience. Could it have gone a lot worse? Could we be sitting there right now with Arthur Smith? Sure, we could be. So again, I'm cautiously optimistic, I would say, about this. And that's the other thing. Jet fans, the way you react to things. I mean, the Jets put out one hype video, and all of a sudden you have the entire fan base on the hype train again. When are we going to learn as a fan base not to just run to the hype immediately? Like, I understand being excited, but maybe just be cautiously optimistic like me. I don't understand how now every single Jet fan, oh, this is a slam dunk. This is the best hire. This is unbelievable. And if you don't like it, you hate the team. You're not a fan. You hate the Jets because you don't agree that this is the best hire ever. No, I don't agree that this is the best hire ever. I think he could be a really good head coach. I think there's a lot of unknown that really scares me. I think there's a history here of an organization that gets bullied by their owner in Woody Johnson, who literally bullies this franchise and bullies its coaches and GMs. And that could really knock this team down. And that could really hurt a guy like Aaron Glenn, who has this respect for Woody and is going to want to cater to what Woody wants and has a great relationship with him. If he starts getting influenced by him and he starts getting to a place where Woody Johnson is making decisions again, that's going to be really bad for this franchise. So, look, I don't think it's automatically a negative thing that the Jets hired him. I'm just not going to be one of those fans who runs on here and every single thing they do is the greatest thing ever and we're winning the Super Bowl again. You know why we're the back-to-back-to-back offseason champions? It's not because the national media, it's because us. It's because us Jets fans, we go crazy over every little thing. We get so overhyped over these little things. We are the ones who make us the offseason champions. And I just want to caution everyone that, okay, this could be a really good hire. I like that he played with the team. I like what I've seen from him. It's also a really scary hire. It's also another guy, a defensive guy, first-time head coach, who's coming in with ties to the organization and ties to specifically to ownership. And another guy, another time they hired the head coach first and not the GM and then the head coach. There's a lot of red flags because what I hoped this offseason would bring, my number one goal for the offseason, was that there would be change, was that this would be a departure from past off seasons, was that this time it would be different. And everyone told me, everyone I know, whether they're in or around the organization, told me that no, there's not going to be a change. There's not going to be this big difference. Woody Johnson still runs the show and he's never going to change. But I had hoped he would because I watched it happen with James Dolan. I'm wearing the Knicks sweatshirt right now. I was at the Knicks game last night at Barclays Center. I hoped that the Knicks, like James Dolan, who brought in Leon Rose, brought in Tibbs, brought in World Wide West and said, it's your guys' show. Do your thing. I'm hands off. I hoped that that's what happened with Woody Johnson and the Jets. I had hoped that Woody Johnson would show up and say, hey, here's a GM. You guys pick the head coach. You guys work together. It's your show. I'm going to take a step back. And the Aaron Glenn hire tells me that Woody Johnson's not ready to do that. And so while it may work initially, while it may be exciting today, the first turn where it starts to go wrong, Woody Johnson's going to step right back in and keep doing his thing and keep meddling. That's what this hire tells me. And that's why it's a frustrating hire. I'm going to root like hell for Aaron Glenn to be successful. I want the best version of Aaron Glenn. I love the Jets and I want them to be successful this year. And for it to happen with a head coach like Aaron Glenn, who was drafted by the team, came up through the team, all the great aspects of what Aaron Glenn can do for this franchise, man, that would be awesome. That would be incredible. I'm just scared. So like and subscribe, share the video. We'll talk about the Aaron Rodgers decision that comes along with this. We'll talk about, there's a lot of other stuff that come along with this. What's going on with the GM search? It felt like it was a slam dunk that they had the GM locked in yesterday. Now it doesn't seem so sure. So we'll talk about all that in a second. But first, I got to tell you guys about something. You see it below. Today's episode, as always, is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. As yes, it's still January of 2025. Whether you are a seasoned fan or a first-time bettor, BetOnline is your ultimate game day companion with the largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA, college basketball, to NHL and UFC. BetOnline is the #1 sports betting source for your new year. By the way, I made a ton of money on Washington because I bet them to beat Aaron Glenn's defense, which they did. I didn't really think Aaron Glenn was going to get gashed like that, make no adjustments, and then get called for 12 men on the field. But all right, I did make a lot of money gambling on the Washington Commanders this past week, and now we have the championship games. You can bet on them again if you believe in them against Philly, although I do think Philly does have the upper hand because I think they're just going to keep running the ball, something that the Lions offense and Ben Johnson didn't do. From touchdowns to three-pointers and hat tricks, BetOnline has you covered on every game, every play, and every win. BetOnline, the game starts here. All right, we'll take a quick break for the podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, we're going to keep going. So quick break right now. Podcast, let's keep going. Or YouTube, I should say, let's keep going. So, by the way, one thing that I will say, when I was watching Ben Johnson do like his little interview and his introduction with the Bears, did anyone else get Adam Gase vibes, or was it just me? Because I watched him and I'm like, oh boy, here we go. The offensive genius, the guy who thinks he's the smartest in the room, the guy who down 10 points is throwing with his wide receiver. He comes into the Bears and he's talking about, he's like looking all over. He looked dazed and confused. He's like an awkward guy. He's talking about beating. Oh, I love being in this division. I think we're going to beat the Packers. Like already ready for, it just gave me Adam Gase vibes. I would be shocked if he makes it 3 years. I feel sorry for Caleb Williams. I could be wrong. Again, I could be wrong, but I got major Adam Gase vibes from Ben Johnson today during his introductory press conference, which, by the way, I am curious when that's going to happen. I don't know if they announced it with the Jets. I don't see it. But I am curious when they're going to announce the introductory press conference for Aaron Glenn. One thing about Aaron Glenn, and they still have to hire a GM, so this decision is yet to be made. So we'll talk about this first, and then we'll talk about the GM afterwards, because that's took an interesting turn. The one thing about Aaron Glenn is that he wants Aaron Rodgers reportedly, and this is reported, and I heard this going back to, towards the end of the season when Aaron Glenn was getting buzz. I heard from people that he really wanted the Jet job, and he did want to keep Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers is obviously starting to play a lot better the second half of the season. Now, I also heard now from Michael Kay and other people, he's made it known that he wants Aaron Rodgers. And why wouldn't you? If you are a new head coach coming into a new situation and you have enough talent to win, but you want to get off to a hot start, you don't want to come into a situation all of a sudden have, I don't know, your quarterback is, we're going with Jordan Travis and Tyrod Taylor as our quarterback tandem. No, I don't think Aaron Glenn would want that, especially after seeing what Rodgers was able to do the second half of the season. So if I'm Aaron Glenn, I would also want Aaron Rodgers. So he talks about Aaron Glenn, like what people have talked about is that Aaron Glenn would want Rodgers, but Woody Johnson kind of not so sure because of his past relationship with Rodgers. And this is where it drives me up a wall. And this is where I think this is a scenario where I would have wanted a different head coach for this exact reason. Who do you think is going to get the final say on Aaron Rodgers? Do you really think the first-time head coach Aaron Glenn is going to get the decision on Aaron Rodgers? Or is Woody Johnson going to say, he insulted me on Pat McAfee, I don't want him. Let's go a different direction. You think the guy who was drafted by and then became a scout under and all these different things and has all this reverence towards Woody Johnson is going to be able to stand up to Woody Johnson and say, no, I'm the head coach now. This is my show. Let me run the show. I want Aaron Rodgers. He's the quarterback we can win with. We can have success this season. I don't believe Aaron Glenn can do that. That's going to be the first test because we'll know right away. So if you're a Jets fan, you're wondering if this is going to be a departure, if things are going to change, if Aaron Glenn really can be the guy who can stand up to Woody Johnson. Test number one. Can he show up and say, I'm putting my foot down? If Aaron Rodgers wants to come back and play with us, he's coming back and playing with us. And that doesn't mean that it has to be Aaron Rodgers' show. He's calling plays on offense. He's running the show. He's deciding who the receivers are. He's deciding who the OC is. No, I don't want that. I just want him to be the quarterback. Until now, with Robert Saleh, with Jeff Ulbrich, we didn't have a head coach who can rein Aaron Rodgers in and say, hey, you're just another one of the 53. You're just another guy on the roster. You are not the owner of this team and quarterback. You're just the quarterback. And that's all. And the quarterback has a lot of responsibility, and we respect you, and you're the 4-time MVP. All that's good. But you're not more than that. If Aaron Glenn can say that to Aaron Rodgers and can put him in his place a little bit, great. He should come back as the quarterback. Because I was thinking about this, and I've talked about this on the podcast before. Rebuilds in the NFL, we've seen this time and time again. Rebuilds in the NFL don't take multiple years. They take 1 year. All it takes is the quarterback or the head coach, the right person coming in, the culture changing. Look at Dan Quinn and Jaden Daniels in Washington. Look at CJ Stroud in Houston with D'Amico Ryans. They turned it around in 1 year, both those franchises. Look at Bo Nix. He went to a terrible situation. It was a mess in Denver. Turned it around in 1 year. That happens in the NFL when you get the right guy. So I'm not going to say that, oh, you need to start the rebuild. This roster isn't bad enough to start a rebuild. You can't strip this roster down. You actually need to build it up. You need to start working with this roster. You have so many talented players. And I think we overestimated how much talent they had. They didn't have a lot of depth on the defensive line. They didn't have a lot of depth on the offensive line. But they have pieces. They have a solid start offensive line. If you think about Fashanu on one side and AVT on the other side, and obviously you have Tippmann in the middle. That's three really good young offensive linemen. You have Breece Hall and Braylon Allen as two running backs. You have Garrett Wilson, maybe Devontae Adams if he comes back. You also have the corner, right? Sauce Gardner, Michael Carter, both those guys under contract. You have Jamie and Sherwood and Quinnen and Quincy Williams. So you have, and by the way, the two edge rushers also, don't forget Will McDonald, hopefully Jermaine Johnson coming off an injury. You have a base and a core of a really good roster. So to say, oh, we need to rebuild, then start trading guys. Honestly, don't give Breece Hall a second contract. Don't give Garrett Wilson a second contract. Don't give Sauce Gardner a second contract. Start trading them if that's what you want. But I don't think they should do that. They have so much talent. And you have assets, you have picks, you have things you could do. They have a flexible roster. I think the Jets can compete for a playoff spot right away this year, which is part of why I wanted a veteran head coach, just because I think it's a compete now team still. I don't think they're a Super Bowl team, but I think they can make the playoffs and break the streak and the drought that they've had in the playoffs for years and years and years. They finally need to break that. So I think they're going to do that. And the best option for them at quarterback is to have the guy they're already paying to play quarterback for them in Aaron Rodgers, as long as you keep him in his place and he's only the quarterback. Speaking of keeping guys in their place, this is going to be a huge test also for Aaron Glenn. Test number 2 for him. We saw the reaction on social media. Quinnen Williams, really excited. Sauce Gardner, really excited. Michael Carter, even DJ Reed, who's not technically rostered, he's a free agent, really excited about the hire. A lot of guys, a lot of former Jets. Everyone speaks very highly of Aaron Glenn. Everyone's excited about this hire. I talked to Bilal Powell today. He's very excited about the hire. We were texting back and forth. He disagrees with me on the Rodgers stuff. Hopefully we'll get him on and we'll talk about that on the show. But we were talking for a while today while sitting in the airport. And I was just like, hey, what do you think? Where you at? I know you're a big Aaron Glenn guy. And he is. He loves Aaron Glenn. He wanted Aaron Glenn to be the coach. He's very excited. Maybe Aaron scouted him. It's possible. I do have to look up what year Aaron Glenn became a scout for the Jets. It's very possible that that's how Bilal got to know him. He's friends with him. He loves him. So all that's good and well, and I'm happy that the players are excited because that was a big thing too. I thought a lot of these young players, if you thought about it with Garrett and Saul, some of these guys would start to ask out. That's what happens when it's such a messy situation. Some of the players start to ask out. I don't know if we even heard that if Aaron Rodgers is back next year, Garrett Wilson's going to ask out. I never believed that. I still don't believe that, but who knows? But stop it with the social media. Aaron Glenn needs to come in and at his press conference already say, hey, I'm glad the guys are excited. No more social media. No more guy. Again, offseason, you could be on social media, but how many times do we see guys making their feelings way too known on social media with the Jets? How many times is it after games? I was supposed to do this, or coach said this, or going after fans, or different, like enough. We need discipline across the board. It's ironic that the guy they hired to be a disciplinarian just watched his team in the biggest spot of a playoff game allow 12 men on the field on 4th down. Crazy. I don't know if it's all on Aaron Glenn. I understand it's a miscommunication. There's a lot in that game that probably doesn't fall on Aaron Glenn. And you could also look at his zero adjustment and say, hey, he trusted his guys. His game plan was to blitz all day. He figured eventually his guys would get home. Jaden Daniels just kept making plays on them. You know, there were guys in his face all day, Jaden Daniels. He just kept making plays. Anyway, that's the second test, though. Test number 2 for Aaron Glenn is discipline them from the start. And it starts with all the posting on social media that we constantly see with this team. Got to end. Got to nip it in the bud. Got to stop it. Now to the general manager, because this is the last thing we need to talk about before I wrap this up. The general manager situation is really interesting because it sounded like it was going to just be Lance Newmark. He comes in, obviously was in Detroit for 26 years. 23 of them were terrible losing seasons. Comes in from Detroit. He obviously became the number 2 guy in Washington last year. Apparently, he was part of the coaching search that brought in Dan Quinn. Good for them. Obviously, the 33rd team. Also, they helped the Jets with this search. they also were part of the team that helped. So they obviously had a relationship, him and Lance Newmark had a relationship together. They hired Dan Quinn together, obviously, and brought in Cliff Kingsbury also as the OC. So interesting situation there. I guess you could say he was part of the turnaround, bringing in guys like Bobby Wagner and Frankie Louvu on defense, and obviously drafting Jayden Daniels. But ultimately, you get Jayden Daniels, you see what type of guy he is. I mean, Jayden Daniels, I haven't seen as good a rookie quarterback in my life. When you get a guy like Jayden Daniels, your franchise is going to turn around. I truly believe it. And by the way, thank you, Greg Zuerlein. I know he stunk this past year, but 2 years ago, hitting that kick against Washington. If he doesn't hit that kick against Washington, Jayden Daniels right now is probably in the AFC Championship game with the New England Patriots. I fully am certain of that yes, that roster is far worse than the Washington roster. It doesn't matter. That's how good Jayden Daniels is. That's how special of a talent I think he is. So it's possible. Now, if they end up in the AFC Championship game, guess what? That probably means that they keep their head coach, John Mayo, and then the Jets maybe get Mike Vrabel. Who knows? Whatever. It's, the butterfly effect. Not the point. The point is that this guy, Lance Newmark, seemed like he was going to be the guy for the GM job, right? This was the guy they were hiring. We're hiring Lance Newmark. He's coming in here. He's from Detroit. He knows Aaron Glenn. They work together. They're coming in together to be the head coach GM combination, which, again, a lot of people are like, oh, they have to have a previous relationship. They have to be on the same page. You're supposed to hire the GM first, then he hires that coach. But if they're working together, that's a good thing. And then he goes home. And now they're starting to interview other candidates for the GM role. Now, I haven't seen if he's gotten a second interview yet, but Alec Halaby from Howie Roseman and the Philadelphia Eagles, that's who I want. He's the guy who that's the number one guy in my book. And by the way, just so you know, GMs, you don't have to wait to hire them till their season is over. You could hire them while they're still in the playoffs with their team. That's how that works. You could just look at it with Tennessee. They hired Mike Borgonzi off of the Chiefs while he was still working for the Chiefs. Chiefs are still playing, and Mike Borgonzi's already hired by the Titans. So you don't have to wait for the playoffs to be over for that. So they could hire Halaby tomorrow. And that's who I'm hoping they hire. I still am, even though it doesn't seem like there's any momentum there, and I haven't seen if he's gotten a second interview or not. Alec Halaby would be the perfect choice for the New York Jets. He is the guy who sat there with Howie Roseman, was his right-hand man. It didn't just build this roster once. This is not a recent success. Time and time again, they've turned over that roster and have been successful over and over and over again. How many times have we seen them turn the roster over in Philadelphia and continue to put out a field, not just a competitive roster, a Super Bowl caliber roster? And Alec Halaby has sat there the entire time with Howie Roseman as his right-hand man and has been a major part of putting together that roster in Kansas City or in Philadelphia, rather. So that's who I want. But the idea that they came in with Lance Newmark, a guy who was in Detroit. Oh, he's in Detroit for 23 years. He was 26 years. He was part of the team that brought Detroit back to life, and then he went to Washington. Was he really? Or did Brad Holmes come from LA and turn that team around 3 years ago? Because 23 of those 26 years, the Lions were the joke of the NFL. They were the crappiest franchise in the league. So don't tell me that he's some great general manager because he worked in Detroit for 26 years. You know how many regimes he had to survive in order to stay in Detroit for 26 years? So it didn't make sense to me that they were just going to blindly talk to him. You don't hear his name being talked about at all by any other organization. Like, at least Aaron Glenn is considered to be one of the top candidates. If he didn't get this job, he likely gets a job in Jacksonville or New Orleans, some of the other options of teams that were going to hire him. So I'm curious to see, and it sounds like it's different. Aaron Glenn left the building yesterday because he wanted to go home, talk to his wife. He came back here to Detroit, which is actually where I am now. Ironically, I don't know. Is it irony? No, it's more, it's coincidental is what it is, but not the point. The point is that he came back to Detroit on Woody's jet. He talked to him, and apparently he just kicked this guy, Lance Newmark, to the curb, who no one had heard of, and said, hey, no, maybe we're going in a different direction. And I'm happy with that. The Jets have never had the GM head coach on the same timetable. It's never happened where it's two guys working together who want to be together. It just never happened. The last time was Tannenbaum hired Rex. And then they fired Tannenbaum and brought in Idzik while Rex was still the head coach. So that was the last time they had a GM who hired the head coach and worked together in tandem. That was the last time that happened. So, because if you think about it, Joe Douglas was hired by Christopher Johnson, and then Woody comes back and hires Robert Saleh. So even that wasn't the same people on the same team on the same side. So to say that Lance Newmark would be two guys on the same page, so that would be great. Yeah, but if it's Lance Newmark, it's not worth it. So Aaron Glenn's obviously going to be okay with whoever comes in as head coach or as GM. Whoever comes in as GM is going to have to be happy with Aaron Glenn. And that's just how we're going to have to move forward with it. Though both those guys are going to have to move forward as a team. And I really do hope it's Alec Halibay. I did see them tweet that, and by the way, that was such an interesting thing. The Jaguars fired their GM today. I don't have the tweet in front of me, but I saw the tweet about who the new potential hires for the GM candidates were going to be, but I don't have it on me. So, more guys that they're going to interview. But all right. Anyway, point is, what I'm trying to get to is that, look, I'm excited. I'm hoping this moves forward as one of the best hires the Jets have ever made. This becomes the head coach that we all remember as the most successful head coach in Jets history. He's here for 25 years, and the Jets do incredible things. Am I skeptical about it? Sure. But I hope I'm wrong. And I will say this. The last thing I'm going to say about this is, despite everything I've said about Aaron Glenn, it seems like I'm anti-Aaron Glenn. What I talked about earlier in the year was the story arc of the New York Mets. Remember the New York Mets in 2023, just the disaster season that was. That coming into the year had all these expectations. They fire the veteran head coach. They hire a first-timer who no one had heard of, obviously. And they take that with a magical team and they go on a crazy run in the second half of the season. That's where we are in the Jets story arc, right? We're at that point where it's like, last year was a disaster, couldn't possibly get worse. We're hiring a first-time head coach. How is he going to save us from this disaster? But maybe this is the guy. Maybe Aaron Glenn is the guy who comes in and all of a sudden he's the Carlos Mendoza. And he comes in and he totally just changes the culture in 1 year. He sets a standard. When a guy throws a glove over the fence, he says, no, you get off my team. Maybe that's who Aaron Glenn is. I hope he's that guy. I hope I'm wrong about him. I have my doubts, but I hope this is the start of something special. I'm going to go into the season cautiously optimistic. I'm not going to be a fan who goes in super negative. I'm also not going to go in saying, we're winning the Super Bowl. This is great. Just even keeled. We'll see what happens. Ride with the ups, ride with the downs. For Aaron himself, I'm happy for him. I'm happy for the organization. And again, I'll be here to talk about all of it. So as soon as there's a GM hired or wherever they're going as the interviews go on, we'll talk about that. I also want to do a preview of the championship games. One of the best Sundays in football is the 2 championship games. It's awesome. So we'll talk about all that and a whole lot more coming up on the Believe Podcast Network. Stay tuned. Obviously, like, subscribe, share the podcast with a friend. If you comment below on YouTube, all that stuff helps the podcast grow. So I appreciate you all for listening. My name is Rami Levy. Until next time, this is Believe in Jets. See ya.